But the issue that I really want to focus on is energy policy. Americans are not any longer just worried about gasoline prices. We're worried about, do we have a coherent energy policy? It makes all the difference. When you see that kind of transition, remember when the energy prices first started going up, people were just worried about, you know, what's the cost of gas going to be? What's this going to cost, you know, to ship a can of beans across the country, or me to take my kid to school every morning? Well, it's not like that anymore. Now people are clamoring for a coherent energy policy. And I would take us back to somebody that you know well, to Gerald R. Ford. His first State of the Union address in January 1975, he presented a coherent energy plan that would have led to energy independence by 1985. Ladies and gentlemen, the price of a barrel of oil in those days was 20 bucks. So we're in a totally different milieu now. Ford had a coherent energy policy. He said we need to start a strategic reserve in time of need. That's where that comes from, the Ford administration. We need to invest in a variety of conservation measures so that we use less energy. And we need to reduce, we need to invest in alternative fuels. And finally, we need to reduce the import of oil when it comes from unstable or hostile governments. You go to a Citgo gasoline station, think Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez, think Venezuela. Now, Venezuela's OPEC. Hugo Chavez hates the United States. He would love nothing more than to spoil for a fight with us, or to see the United States embroiled in some kind of a fight with a large power like China or Russia. Do you know what Hugo Chavez just announced yesterday? Joint naval exercises with the Russian Navy. I want you to think about that. And we get a large percentage of oil from OPEC, and specifically from Venezuela. And every time you go to a Citgo filling station, that is going into Hugo Chavez's pockets. Why are we so vulnerable? Why is 70% of our oil coming from unstable regimes, or regimes that hate our guts? Something has got to change fast. Thank goodness both parties are in accord on that one. Now, here's where I will say something about President Bush, which will sound very judgmental, but I throw it out there for your consideration. Some presidents have incredible vision, and they do what's totally unexpected. So you have, for example, a Southern president, Lyndon Johnson, become the leader of the civil rights movement in Washington. A Southern president is able to make the civil rights legislation happen. You take an anti-communist, Richard Nixon. What does he do? He goes to China. The Southern bigot leads civil rights. The chief anti-communist, back from Alger Hiss days, for Pete's sake, becomes the one who opens the door to the communists. You round out this little trilogy. Bush, the oil man, could have been the president with imagination and determination, the guy who led us past our dependence on so much foreign oil. He missed a golden opportunity. He would have been the one who could have brought together the oil executives and talked to him, because the oil executives would have trusted him. Do you think they're going to trust Barack Obama? They see Barack Obama as a different animal, somebody who does not speak their language, understand their world. Barack Obama will have to force change. McCain, in some degree, may have to force change in energy policy. George W. Bush was the guy who should have done it. And that's why I think there is a consensus in this country, and I think Republicans and Democrats are actually very close on this point. We need energy change. The status quo is unacceptable. And Americans are unhappy about it, and very rightly so. Not just because of the prices at the oil pump, but because of our foreign policy. I think we're skeptical of entering any more wars where it's basically so that we can have cheap fuel. We need to become energy independent so that we are not driving our foreign policy based on oil from regimes that hate our guts or are unstable. Russia, has a lot of oil. Do we want to be dependent on Russia for our oil supplies? Don't think so. Okay. There's several factors that make the 2008 election interesting or unique. Let me just run through those very fast. How much time do I have to? I want to make sure that we have.
You have 15 minutes.
Okay, I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. But several factors. 2008 is the first election since 1952 that is wide open, when you truly have a possibility for somebody who's not part of an administration. You don't have a vice president running. You don't have an incumbent running for re-election. So truly this is a year in which change is invited since 1952. This is the first time that that's happened. Second, this is the first time that a black or a woman will be in one of the two top national offices in the land. This is historic social change. By definition now, we know that that change will come about. 3, young people are going to vote in record numbers this year. Frank Luntz said yesterday that all of his polling, based from his offices in Washington, all of his polling, national polls, show that young people are engaged as they've never been engaged. And you know, we can think back to 1968 and other years where it seemed that there were lots of young people who were engaged. But this year, they apparently really will go to the polls. They're not just marching in the streets. They're going to vote. And according to Luntz, 75% of them will vote for Barack Obama. Fourth, this is the first time that the two finalists for the presidency are senators. Think about that. How many times have we had senators as presidents? Kennedy was one. There was one other.
Johnson.
He was he was vice president before then he ran. He had been the master of the Senate, as Bob Caro says, for many, many years. But technically he moved from the vice presidency to the presidency and on the assassination of Kennedy, and then he was elected. Harding. That old newspaper man, Warren Harding, back in 1920. So in 1960, we had an election that forwarded a senator to the presidency. In 1920, we had an election that forwarded a senator. But never before in U.S. history had two senators been the finalists. So that's kind of an interesting fact right there. Now, when I think of the Senate, I think of consummate insiders. You may say, oh, well, Barack Obama's only been there a few years. He's not really an insider. Ha, ha, ha. Think about it. Think of the state machinery, the party apparatus that elects senators. You have to be an insider to be a U.S. senator. By definition, you're an insider. So Barack Obama is more of an insider than his rhetoric would betray. And of course, John McCain, for all of his I'm an independent maverick, of course he's an insider. So don't get too carried away by the rhetoric. These are insiders if they're sitting in the U.S. Senate today. They have to do a lot of things to go along and get along with the status quo to be there. And that's just the way politics works. We have generational change. Think about the fact that two of the people in the four running for the four individuals who are running for the top two offices, two of them are post-Vietnam generation. Now let's put this in perspective. I mean, you have Sarah Palin, Barack Obama, who came of age after involvement in Vietnam. But when you think about it, this is unusual in U.S. history. If you take the string of presidents we had in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, even into the early 90s, they were all people who wore the uniform in World War II. We had 8 presidents in all who wore the uniform in World War II and later became presidents. Then, of course, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton were the two most recent presidents, and they grew up in the Vietnam generation. So now we have two people, in Barack Obama and Sarah Palin, who don't remember the 60s. They don't have that in their heads. So that's going to be an interesting generational change.